You don't know how much freedom weighs until it's taken from you. The cuffs went on tight. Not too tight, but enough to remind me that the metal wasn't coming off. The officer gripping my arm didn't say a word as he walked me from the courtroom, through a maze of hallways, and into the loading bay where the transport van was waiting. Through the small, reinforced window, I caught a glimpse of the courthouse steps. Reporters, flashing cameras, strangers staring at me like I was some kind of animal on display. The judge's words still rang in my head. 20 years. 20 years for something I didn't do. I wasn't innocent of everything. No one really is, but I wasn't guilty of this. The prosecution called it aggravated robbery and manslaughter. They painted a picture of me as a man desperate for money, who walked into that gas station one night, waved a gun in the clerk's face, and left with a register full of cash. A security guard tried to stop me, and according to them, I pulled the trigger. It wasn't true. The real thief? He was smart. Włoski mask. Same height as me, same build. The cameras caught him, but the footage was grainy. The only evidence they had was a witness, a guy who swore he saw me running from the scene. But witnesses lie. They misremember. They see what they think they saw, and suddenly a bad night turns into a lifetime in a cell. My public defender wasn't bad, but he wasn't good enough either. And when it was my word against the system won. The van ride felt endless. I sat in the back, shackled to a metal bench, staring at my own reflection in the scratched-up divider between me and the driver. I tried to stay calm, but my hand was shaking. I read about prison, watched documentaries, heard stories. But none of that prepares you for the real thing. The gates of Redwood Correctional Facility loomed ahead, high concrete walls lined with razor wire, guard towers at every corner. The kind of place built to make sure men like me never saw the outside world again. The van stopped. The doors opened. My name was called. Processing was a blur. They took my fingerprints, my mugshot, made me strip in front of a guard who didn't even look me in the eye, tossed me a set of blue jumpsuit scrubs and a pair of thin shoes with no laces. Then they walked me down a long, echoing hallway to my new home. Cell 214. A metal bunk. A toilet with no seat. A swivel window, so high up I couldn't see anything but sky. The first night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the prison, distant shouting, the clanking of metal doors, the occasional scream. I had 20 years to go. I wasn't going to make it. The first few months were about survival. Prison isn't just about doing time. It's about learning the rules. Not the ones written in a handbook. The real rules. Who to talk to. Who to avoid. How to move through the yard without looking weak. I kept my head down. I worked in the laundry. I didn't cause problems. But even when you follow the rules, prison has a way of dragging you into the fire. It started with a fight. Not one I wanted, but one I couldn't walk away from. A guy named Dre, big, bald, tattooed from his neck down, took it upon himself to test me. It happened in the cafeteria. A shove. A tray knocked to the floor. A moment of silence as everyone waited to see what I'd do. Backing down wasn't an option. If you fold once, you'll fold forever. So I hit him. Hard. It wasn't pretty, and I got the worst of it. But in prison, you don't have to win fights. You just have to fight back. After that, I wasn't a target anymore. Time passed in slow, brutal cycles. Days became months. My appeals were denied, one after the other. Visits from my sister stopped coming. Too painful for her, I guess. Friends from the outside stopped writing. One night, I sat on my bunk, staring at the wall, and realized something. If I didn't find a way out of here, I was going to die in this place. That was the night I started watching. I memorized every guard shift. I paid attention to who was lazy and who wasn't. I took note of blind spots in the cameras. I worked in maintenance now, and that meant access to tools. Not much, but enough. And there was one thing no one ever paid attention to: the old utility tunnels under the prison. They were supposed to be sealed off years ago, but I had a feeling they weren't. Escape wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a plan. There's a moment in every prison escape story where the guy gets a crazy idea, and from that second on, nothing else matters except breaking out. For me, that moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a flash of genius or stroke of luck. It was desperation. I wasn't counting years anymore. I was counting ways out. I spent my days pushing carts of linens through Redwood's hallways, my face blank, my body moving like just another cog in a machine. But my mind was somewhere else. Watching, noticing, learning. Prisons are built to break men, but they're built by men, and men make mistakes. The utility tunnels were my mistake to find. Redwood was old, built back when they cared more about keeping prisoners from tunneling out than about security cameras and motion sensors. Somewhere beneath these walls were service tunnels, built to run water, gas, and power lines through the facility. Most inmates didn't care about history. I did. Working in maintenance gave me access to the prison's old logbooks, stacks of water-damaged pages detailing every pipe, every vent, every forgotten tunnel beneath our feet. The maps were outdated, full of revisions and scribbled corrections from workers who stopped caring decades ago. But that just meant no one was paying attention to what was down there anymore. And if no one was paying attention, that meant I could use it. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I didn't trust anyone, though I didn't, but because you don't need a partner to escape prison. Partners get sloppy. Partners talk too much. Partners get caught. I was doing this alone, and that meant I had to be perfect. I started making excuses to go into the maintenance corridors whenever I could. I'd offer to fix a broken sink, a flickering light, anything that would get me closer to where I needed to be. The first time I saw the hatch, my heart nearly stopped. It was in a storage closet near the boiler room. A rusted metal door, bolted shut, half hidden beneath a pile of mop buckets and old supplies. No cameras, no guards, just forgotten space. I knelt down, running my fingers along the edges. The bolts were old, corroded. It would take time, but if I could get them loose without anyone noticing, I'd have a way down. A way out. The hard part wasn't finding the exit. The hard part was getting the tools to open it. Stealing anything in prison is a risk. Stealing tools? That's a one-way ticket to solitary if you get caught. But Redwood was sloppy. The maintenance room kept an inventory list, a clipboard full of check marks that no one actually counted. That's where I started. One week, I signed out a small wrench and forgot to return it. A few days later, I slipped a rusty screwdriver into my boot and walked out. Piece by piece, I built up a small collection of tools, each one carefully hidden in a vent behind my bunk. It took me 4 weeks to get everything I needed. And then, just when I thought I was ready, everything almost fell apart. The guard shift changed. For months, I had been watching the same rotation, the same lazy officers who barely checked the hallways, the same blind spots I had memorized. Then one morning, we got a new officer on duty. And this one actually paid attention. I noticed it when I was pushing my laundry cart through the East Wing. Normally, the guard at post 4 barely glanced at the security monitors. But now a new guy stood there, arms crossed, watching, not at nothing, at everything, at me. It took all my willpower not to react, not to change my routine, not to turn around and head the other way. I kept pushing my cart like I hadn't noticed. But my mind was racing. If the shift change meant more alert guards, I'd have to adjust my plan. The hatch was still locked, the bolts still in place. I needed more time to loosen them. I needed a distraction. That night, I did something dangerous. I caused a power surge. It was small, nothing big. Just a tampered breaker in the West Wing that shut down power to a few lights and 1 camera feed for 3 minutes. Long enough to make the guard scramble. Long enough to slip into the maintenance closet unnoticed. My hands worked fast, muscles tight with adrenaline. I pried at the rusted bolts, every turn of the wrench echoing louder than I wanted it to. 1 bolt. 2. The third wouldn't budge. I grit my teeth, forcing the wrench harder. It slipped, clattered against the metal floor. I froze. Nothing. No voices. No footsteps. Just the sound of my own pulse hammering in my ears. I gripped the wrench again and kept going. The last bolt came loose. I slid the hatch open just a fraction, enough to see the darkness below. I didn't know how deep it went. Didn't know if the tunnel would be blocked, if I'd get stuck, if this was all for nothing. But I knew one thing. I was going down there, and I wasn't coming back. The moment I slid through the hatch, the air changed. It was thicker down here, damp, stale, heavy with the smell of rust and mildew. The kind of air that hadn't moved in years. Maybe decades. The tunnel stretched out below me, a shaft of crumbling concrete and rusted metal supports. My feet found the ladder rungs, slick with condensation, some barely holding onto the wall anymore. I took a deep breath. Then I started climbing down. The walls sweated. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The only sound was the creaking metal beneath my grip and the steady, distant drip of water somewhere below. I didn't know how deep the shaft went. The old logbooks I'd studied had conflicting diagrams. Some said the tunnels ran beneath the prison. Others claimed they had been sealed off years ago. But I had a feeling no one had been down here a long time. And that meant no cameras. No guards. Just me. After what felt like 100 rungs, my foot hit solid ground. I dropped into a narrow corridor, my breath fogging in the cold air. The ceiling was low, the walls cracked with age, roots creeping through the broken concrete like veins under skin. I flicked on the pen light I had stolen from the maintenance room. The beams sliced through the darkness, revealing what looked like an old utility tunnel. Pipes running along the ceiling, rusted electrical boxes bolted to the walls. If I was right, one of these tunnels would lead to the outer perimeter. If I was wrong, I'd be trapped underground with nowhere to go. I moved carefully, stepping over puddles and broken bricks, my ears straining for any sound that didn't belong. A rat scurried past my boot. I didn't flinch. I wasn't afraid of rats. I was afraid of time running out. Above me, the prison was still awake, still watching, still waiting. I needed to be out of here before morning head count. I turned a corner and stopped dead. The tunnel was collapsed. A wall of rubble blocked the passage ahead. Chunks of ceiling, broken pipes, layers of dust thick enough to choke on. I clenched my jaw. No way through. No way out. I turned back, retracing my steps. The tunnels had forked near the ladder. Another passage running east. Maybe it led somewhere. It had to. I broke into a jog, my boots splashing through stagnant puddles, ignoring the cold sweat creeping down my spine. Then, up ahead, a metal grate. Not a wall, not a dead end. A way forward. The grate was rusted, barely hanging onto its hinges. I wedged my stolen screwdriver between the metal bars and wrenched it sideways. The first bolt popped, then the second. I grabbed the edges and pulled. The grate groaned in protest. Too loud. Too much noise. I held my breath, waiting. Nothing. No alarms. No footsteps above. Just silence. I forced the grate open enough to squeeze through, my heart slamming against my ribs. Beyond it, the tunnel widened into what looked like an old drainage channel, long, dark, sloping downward. This was it, the way out. I ran, didn't think, didn't stop. The tunnel twisted and turned, the ground shifting beneath my feet, the air growing colder. And then, the walls started shaking. I skidded to a stop as a deep, echoing rumble filled the tunnel. Then came the dust, rolling toward me like a wave. I pressed against the wall as the tunnel shuddered, bits of concrete breaking loose from the ceiling. Something had given way behind me. Maybe my movements had loosened the already weak structure. Maybe Redwood was fighting back. Either way, I couldn't go back now. I pushed forward, lungs burning, until I saw it. A faint glow up ahead. Not artificial light. Not prison floodlights. Moonlight. The outside. The tunnel ended at a rusted drainage pipe, its opening barely wide enough for me to crawl through. The bars covering it had corroded so badly I could snap them with my hands. I dropped to my knees, gripping the edges, ignoring the sting of fresh cuts on my fingers. Then, for the first time in 5 years, I pulled myself out of Redwood Correctional Facility. The cold night air hit me like a punch to the chest. I staggered out of the pipe, boots sinking into damp grass, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I was outside the fence, outside the prison walls. But I wasn't free. Not yet. Because now, they would know I was gone. The air outside Redwood Correctional Facility was too open, too quiet. 4 or 5 years, I had been trapped in a world of concrete and steel, where space was measured in inches and the sky was nothing more than a strip of blue through a barred window. Now I was exposed. I crouched low in the grass, forcing my breath to steady. My body was shaking, not just from exhaustion, but from the raw adrenaline dump of getting this far. Behind me, the prison loomed in the darkness, its searchlights sweeping methodically across the yard. My tunnel exit was outside the main perimeter, just beyond the fence. No alarms had sounded yet. That meant they still thought I was in my cell. Good. I need more time. My next move was simple. Get distance, disappear into the night. The nearest patch of woods was about half a mile east, thick enough to cover me until I could find a real way out of this county. I forced my legs to move. One step, then another. My side ached, my head was pounding, but none of that mattered. I was almost free. Then I heard the gunshot. Crack. The sound split the night like lightning, sharp, precise. Not random. A warning. I dropped to the ground instinctively, my body hitting the dirt before I even knew what I was reacting to. Another shot. This one even closer. I scanned the field. The prison guards weren't out here yet. So who the hell was shooting at me? That's when I saw them. Two figures, emerging from the tree line ahead of me, both moving fast. Not guards. Not in uniform. Not cops. No sirens. They were dressed in dark clothes, moving too quietly, too purposefully. One of them was holding a rifle, the barrel still smoking. My stomach dropped. I had planned for everything. Guards, dogs, helicopters. But I hadn't planned for them. Whoever they were, they had been waiting. And somehow, they had known exactly where I was going to be. I scrambled backward, crawling toward the only cover I could find, an old, half-buried drainage ditch. The ground sloped sharply, giving me just enough of a dip to stay out of sight. My mind raced. Was it a setup? Had someone inside the prison tipped them off? Or worse, had they been watching me long before I even escaped? I clenched my fists. No time for questions. Only time to survive. The two men stopped near the tunnel exit. One knelt down, running a gloved hand over my footprints in the grass. The other scanned the field with the rifle, his eyes sweeping over the landscape like he was reading a map no one else could see. Then one of them spoke. His voice was calm. Too calm. He's still close. The other one nodded, standing up. Keep moving. They turned toward the woods, following the path I had planned to take. That's when it hit me. They weren't just tracking me. They were waiting for me to run. I stayed completely still in the ditch, my breath barely moving in my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run the other way, to disappear in the opposite direction. But that's what they wanted. They had expected me to go east, toward the trees. So I made a different choice. I went west. The prison was behind me. But instead of running away, I started crawling toward it. Not to go back inside, but because the last place they would expect me to move was closer to the danger. The far northwest corner of the prison property had something I had memorized weeks ago. A junkyard, an abandoned vehicle lot, full of rusted-out buses, broken-down machinery, places to hide. I moved slow, careful not to make a sound. The two men were still sweeping the fields, stalking forward like hunters. I wasn't about to let them trap me like prey. 15 minutes later, I reached the first row of rotting metal husks. Old transport vans, a few military-style trucks, even a rusted school bus, half covered in vines. I slid between them, my body screaming in protest. Every inch of me hurt, but I had no choice. I crawled under an old police transport van, rolling onto my back and pressing myself flat against the damp earth. Then I waited and listened. Footsteps. Slow. Calculated. Getting closer. One of the men was near the junkyard now, moving between the rusted cars. I could hear his breathing. Then, the click of a radio. Nothing yet, he muttered. But he's out here. I know it. A pause. Then a reply, crackling through the static. We wait. He'll make a mistake. Wait for what? The footsteps faded. I stayed completely still, my pulse hammering against my ribs. Then, for the first time in 5 years, a new kind of fear settled into my bones. This wasn't about escaping prison anymore. This was about who was waiting for me on the other side. 4 or 5 years, I thought the hardest part would be breaking out of Redwood Correctional Facility, that escaping the walls, the guards, the searchlights would be the greatest battle of my life. I was wrong, because now I was out, and they were still waiting for me. I stayed hidden under the rusted-out transport van, my breath slow and controlled, listening. The two men had stopped searching. That was the part that scared me the most. They weren't lost. They were waiting. I didn't know why. I had planned for police, for roadblocks, for dogs and helicopters. But these men, the ones who had known exactly where I'd be, they weren't part of that plan, which meant I had walked into something I didn't understand. I needed distance. If they were expecting me to run east toward the woods, and if I couldn't go back toward the prison, that left one option, the industrial park on the other side of the junkyard. It was a long shot, but if I could get to the train yards, I might find a way out of the county. I just had to get there alive. The rain had started again, turning the dirt into thick mud. Good for covering my tracks. Bad for running. I crawled from under the van and moved low between the abandoned vehicles, keeping my steps light. The yard stretched for at least 100 meters, rows of rusted buses and wrecked machinery towering on either side of me. The exit was just ahead, an old chain-link fence with a gap near the bottom where the metal had rotted away. I was almost there. Then, a metallic click behind me, a gun being cocked. "Don't move." The voice was calm, steady. "No anger, no urgency, just control." I turned slow, hands slightly raised, my pulse hammering in my throat. One of the men, the one with the rifle, stood a few meters away, half hidden in the shadows of a gutted delivery truck. Even in the dim light, I could see his face. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't about Redwood. This was about me. Because I had seen this man before. Not here. Not in prison. But before I was locked up. A memory crashed back, sharp and sudden. The trial, the evidence against me, the man who had pointed me out in court. The witness. The one who got me convicted. The one who lied. And now he wasn't in a courtroom anymore. Now he was standing in front of me with a gun in his hands. Everything clicked into place. The robbery. The security footage that never quite matched. The holes in the case that no one cared to fill. I was never just a random guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was the fall guy. And now that I was out, someone had to clean up the mess. The man took a slow step forward. "You weren't supposed to get out," he muttered. "That's a problem." I clenched my fists, my brain working overtime. The police weren't here. The guards weren't coming. Because this wasn't their job anymore. This was his. A second shadow moved behind me. The other guy, closing in. 2 against 1. No weapons. No way to run fast enough. I had one chance. I lunged. The fight was fast, messy, desperate. I wasn't stronger than them, wasn't faster, but I was willing to break every rule. I slammed into the man with the gun, knocking him back into the rusted truck. The rifle clattered to the ground, and I kicked it into the mud, out of reach. The second guy grabbed me from behind, arms locked around my throat. I twisted, throwing my elbow back, connected with his ribs. His grip loosened for half a second. That was enough. I broke free, grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, a jagged piece of rebar from the ground, and swung. The man barely had time to react before the metal connected with his knee. A sickening crack. A scream. He went down. The other guy scrambled for the gun. I didn't give him time. I ran. Not toward the fence. That's where they expected me to go. I ran deeper into the junkyard, slipping between wreckage, heart pounding, my hands shaking with adrenaline and something worse. I wasn't escaping anymore. I was surviving. By the time I reached the fence, my body was barely holding together. But I didn't stop. I clawed through the gap, ripping my arm open on rusted metal, and dropped to the other side. The industrial park was just ahead. Dark, empty, full of places to disappear. Behind me, voices shouted in the distance. They weren't done hunting me yet. But now I knew the truth. I was never just a prisoner. I was a loose end. And if I wanted to stay free, I had to finish what they started.